The flames consumed everything Marcus had ever loved in 37 seconds. His pregnant wife Sarah screamed his name as the fire engulfed their home, all because she'd planted flowers without HOA approval. Margaret Whitmore, the neighborhood's self-appointed queen, had escalated a simple violation into murder. But Margaret made one fatal mistake: she didn't know Marcus was a Navy SEAL. And when a SEAL loses everything, the enemy doesn't get to keep breathing. Justice isn't always served cold. Marcus Reed knelt beside his wife's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. The ventilator's rhythmic hiss filled the silence that had become his world for the past 3 days. Sarah's face, once radiant with the glow of 6 months of pregnancy, now bore the angry red marks of smoke inhalation and burns. Her left hand, which had tenderly caressed her growing belly just days ago, was wrapped in pristine white bandages. The baby's heartbeat is strong, Dr. Martinez had told him that morning, her voice cautiously optimistic. But we need to keep monitoring both of them closely. The smoke inhalation. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that hung between them like a death sentence. Marcus pressed his lips to Sarah's forehead, tasting the antiseptic that had become her permanent perfume. "I'm going to fix this," he whispered against her skin. "I promise you, baby. I'm going to fix all of this." The memory of 3 nights ago played on repeat in his mind like a broken film reel. He'd been deployed in Syria, leading a reconnaissance mission in the desert heat, when the call came through. His commanding officer's face had been grim as he delivered the news: house fire, wife critical, baby status unknown. The next 18 hours had been a blur of military transport planes and desperate prayers to a God he'd stopped believing in somewhere between his 3rd and 4th tour, but it wasn't until he'd arrived at Mercy General Hospital that he'd learned the truth. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. The automatic doors of the ICU slid open with a soft whoosh, and Marcus looked up to see Detective Ray Castellanos approaching. Ray had been his neighbor before Marcus had enlisted, back when life was simple. And the biggest worry was whether the Steelers would make the playoffs. Now Ray wore the weight of bad news in the lines around his eyes. "Any change?" Ray asked, settling into the chair beside Marcus. "No." Marcus's voice was sandpaper rough. "Tell me you have something." Ray pulled out a worn notebook, the kind cops had been using for decades. "I've got the fire marshal's report. Definitely arson. Accelerant was poured around the foundation of your house, concentrated near the garden area. The fire started there and spread fast." Marcus's jaw clenched. "And Margaret Whitmore?" "That's where it gets complicated." Ray flipped through his notes. "She's got an alibi. Claims she was at her book club that night, and 3 women are backing her up." "But Marcus..." Ray leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've been a cop for 20 years. I know when someone's lying. And Margaret Whitmore is scared shitless. She should be." "Don't." Ray's voice carried a warning. "Don't go down that road. Let me handle this." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where ordinary people went about their ordinary lives. "You want to know what I learned in the Navy, Ray? I learned that there are 2 kinds of people in this world. Those who follow the rules and those who make the rules. Margaret Whitmore thinks she makes the rules. The law, the law." Marcus turned back to face his old friend. "The law says that a pregnant woman can't plant flowers in her own front yard without written permission from the Homeowners Association. The law says that Margaret Whitmore has the right to fine us, harass us, and make our lives miserable because we dared to beautify our property without her blessing. Tell me, Ray, how's that law working out for Sarah?" Ray stood, closing his notebook. "I'm going to find the evidence to put her away. But I need you to promise me you'll stay out of it. For Sarah's sake. For the baby's sake." Marcus nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the parking lot. "I promise I'll do what's right." After Ray left, Marcus returned to Sarah's bedside. He took her unbandaged hand in his, feeling the wedding ring that had somehow survived the fire. It was warm against his palm, a reminder of the life they'd built together. "You remember when we first moved to Willowbrook," he said softly. "You were so excited about that little front yard. You had all these plans, roses by the mailbox, herbs, By the kitchen window, maybe a little vegetable garden out back. You said you wanted to make it beautiful for when the baby came. Sarah's eyes remained closed, but Marcus could have sworn he felt her fingers twitch in response. Margaret Whitmore didn't think your flowers were beautiful enough. She said they violated the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. $500 fine for each day they remained. Marcus's voice grew harder. You tried to explain that you were pregnant, that you'd planted them because you were nesting, getting ready for our son. She told you that pregnancy wasn't an excuse for breaking the rules. The machine surrounding Sarah's bed continued there. Electronic chorus, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat of both mother and child. I wasn't here to protect you, Marcus continued. I was 8,000 miles away, playing soldier in someone else's war, while you were fighting your own battle. Right here at home. She escalated it, Sarah. Every day, a new violation. The flowers were too tall. The mulch was the wrong color. The garden border wasn't regulation width. She was trying to force us out of our own home. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the last letter Sarah had sent him before the fire. Her handwriting was careful and precise, the way she wrote when she was trying to stay calm about something that was driving her crazy. She wrote me that Margaret had started coming by every day, Marcus read aloud. Morning, noon, and night. Taking pictures, measuring plants with a ruler, writing violation notices. You said she seemed unhinged, like she was on some kind of mission to destroy us. He folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. But you didn't back down. You never backed down from a fight, did you? You researched the HOA bylaws, found out that most of her violations were bogus. You were going to fight her at the next board meeting. The door opened again, and this time it was Dr. Martinez. She approached with the cautious optimism that medical professionals wore like armor. Mr. Reed. I have some news about the baby. Marcus stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. Good. News or bad news? Cautiously good. The baby's vital signs are stable, and the latest ultrasound shows normal development. It's still early, but we are optimistic. The relief hit him like a physical blow. And Sarah? She's stable as well. The next 48 hours will be critical, but she's a fighter. The baby seems to be giving her strength. After Dr. Martinez left, Marcus returned to his vigil. But something had shifted inside him. The relief had crystallized into something harder, more focused. His wife and child were going to survive. Which meant Margaret Whitmore's worst nightmare was about to begin. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Tommy Nguyen answered on the second ring. Marcus. Jesus Christ, man, I heard about Sarah. How is she? She's going to live. The baby too. Marcus kept his voice steady. I need a favor, Tommy. Anything. You know that. I need you to find out everything you can about Margaret Whitmore. Where she works, where she shops, what she does for fun. Everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that Margaret Whitmore needs to understand that actions have consequences. The cops are going to follow the law. They are going to build a case, go through proper channels, hope for the best. But I'm not a cop anymore, Tommy. I'm a Navy SEAL whose pregnant wife was burned alive by a psychopath with a clipboard. Marcus, 24 hours, Tommy. That's all I need. Marcus hung up and returned to Sarah's bedside. He took her hand again, feeling the steady pulse in her wrist. I made you a promise, he whispered. I'm going to fix this. But first, I need to make sure Margaret Whitmore understands exactly what she's done. He leaned down and kissed her forehead one more time. I'll be back soon. There's something I need to take care of. As Marcus walked out of the hospital, he passed a flower shop in the lobby. The display was full of bright, cheerful blooms, roses, daisies, tulips. The same kinds of flowers Sarah had planted in their front yard. The same flowers that had cost her everything. He stopped and bought a single red rose, then walked out into the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky. in shades of orange and red that reminded him of fire. Margaret Whitmore was about to learn that some gardens bloom in blood. The neighborhood of Willowbrook was a monument to suburban conformity, where every lawn was precisely edged and every mailbox painted the approved shade of hunter green. Marcus drove through the familiar streets, noting how nothing had changed since the fire. The other residents went about their evening routines as if a woman hadn't been burned alive 3 blocks away. As if the HOA's reign of terror was just the price of living in paradise. But as Marcus pulled into Margaret Whitmore's driveway, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Her garden was immaculate. Perfect. And in the center of her flowerbed, Margaret Whitmore's house stood like a fortress of suburban perfection at the end of Maple Street, its white colonial facade gleaming under the streetlights. Every blade of grass was regulation height, every shrub trimmed to HOA specifications. The American flag hung at the precise angle mandated by the neighborhood covenant, and the brass numbers on her mailbox sparkled as if they were polished daily. Marcus parked his rental car across the street and studied the house that had become the epicenter of his rage. The roses in Margaret's front garden seemed to mock him in the darkness, their red blooms catching the light like drops of blood. Sarah's blood. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. Found what you need. Sending files now. The information came through in a series of attachments that painted a picture of Margaret Whitmore's life in meticulous detail. 62 years old, widowed, retired from a career in municipal planning. No children. No siblings. Her entire world had contracted to the 37 houses of Willowbrook Estates, where she'd served as HOA president for 8 consecutive years, but it was the final attachment that made Marcus's hands tighten on the steering wheel. Police reports. 12 complaints filed against Margaret Whitmore in the past 5 years. Harassment, trespassing, destruction of property. All dismissed or settled out of court. The pattern was always the same. She'd target a family, escalate violations until they either conformed completely or moved away. The Hendersons had lasted 6 months before selling their house at a loss. The Patels had endured 18 months of daily harassment before relocating to another state. The Johnsons had fought back, filing a countersuit, but Margaret had connections in the city planning office. Their building permits were mysteriously denied, their property taxes reassessed, their lives made miserable until they finally surrendered. Sarah had been different. Sarah had refused to surrender. Marcus closed his phone and pulled out the single red rose he'd bought at the hospital. He twirled it between his fingers, feeling the thorns bite into his skin. Pain was good. Pain kept him focused. The front door of Margaret's house opened and she emerged onto her porch. Even at 9:30 p.m., she was perfectly dressed in a navy cardigan and pressed slacks, her grey hair styled in the same severe bob she'd worn in every neighborhood meeting. She carried a small watering can and began tending to her prized roses. Marcus watched her through the scope of his training. In Syria, he'd learned to read people's body language, to identify threats and weaknesses from a distance. Margaret moved with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. She was methodical, predictable, vulnerable. She was also completely unaware that death was watching her from across the street. Marcus slipped out of his car and moved through the shadows with the fluid grace of a predator. 8 years of special forces training had taught him to become invisible when necessary. He approached the side of Margaret's house, where a tall hedge provided cover from the street. Through the kitchen window, he could see her moving around. Inside, following what appeared to be a rigid evening routine. She washed her watering can with the same precision she applied to everything else, dried it with a towel, and placed it in an exact position on the counter. Then she pulled out a leather-bound notebook and began writing. Marcus moved closer, pressing himself against the exterior wall. He could hear her voice through the slightly open window, talking to herself as she wrote. Mrs. Patterson violated Section 4.3.2 today, she muttered, her pen scratching across the paper. Children's toys left in the front yard for more than 2 hours. Third offense. Mandatory hearing required. She flipped through several pages, each one covered with neat handwriting documenting the sins of her neighbors. It was a catalogue of petty grievances elevated to the level of federal crimes in Margaret's twisted mind. The Reed property remains a total loss, she continued, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Insurance investigation ongoing. Lot will need to be cleared and resodded before new construction can begin. Must ensure compliance with updated landscaping requirements. She spoke about the fire that had nearly killed his wife and child the same way she might discuss a minor zoning violation. Clinical. Detached. Satisfied, Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording through the window. Margaret continued her evening ritual, unaware that her every word was being documented. Sarah Reed was warned multiple times about her garden violations, she said, making a note in her book. Tragic outcome, but the rules exist for a reason. Perhaps the next residents will be more compliant. The recording stopped when Marcus's finger squeezed the phone so hard the screen cracked. Margaret Whitmore had just confessed to burning down his house. Not in so many words, but the subtext was clear. She'd escalated the situation until it reached its inevitable conclusion. He moved away from the window and circled the house, cataloging every detail. Security system, basic ADT setup, probably. Hadn't been updated in years. Locks, standard residential hardware, nothing a skilled operator couldn't bypass. Escape routes, 3 exits, with the back door opening onto a wooded area that would provide cover, but Marcus wasn't planning a break-in. He was planning something much more sophisticated. He returned to his car and drove to the Willowbrook Community Center, where the HOA held its monthly meetings. The building was dark, but the parking lot was illuminated by streetlights. Marcus parked and walked to the main entrance, where a bulletin board displayed the official HOA communications. At the top of the board, printed on expensive letterhead, was a notice signed by Margaret Whitmore, emergency HOA meeting date, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Subject, new safety regulations following recent tragedy. Attendance MANDATORY. Marcus photographed the notice, then walked around the building. The community center was a typical suburban structure, built in the 1990s with standard security measures. He found what he was looking for on the side wall, an electrical junction box that controlled the building's power systems. His phone rang. As he was examining the box, Ray Castellanos. Marcus, where are you? Hospital. Why? Because I just got a call from Margaret Whitmore. She says someone was lurking around her house tonight, and she thinks it was you. Marcus leaned against the wall, forcing his voice to remain calm. That's interesting. Did she file a report? She's thinking about it. Marcus, please tell me you're not doing anything stupid. I'm sitting in a hospital room, Ray. My wife is on life support, and I'm trying to figure out how to put my life back together. Margaret Whitmore is paranoid because she knows what she did. There was a long pause. The fire marshal found something else. Residue on the accelerant suggests it was mixed with something else. Something that would make it burn hotter, faster. What kind of something? Pool chemicals. Specifically, the kind used for cleaning. Margaret Whitmore has a swimming pool. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the pieces click into place. Are you going to arrest her? I'm going to try. But her lawyer is already circling the wagons. Claims the chemicals could have come from anywhere. We need more evidence. Then find it. I'm trying, Marcus. But I need you to promise me you'll stay away from her. If she files a complaint and you're caught anywhere near her property, it'll muddy the waters for the prosecution. I understand. Marcus hung up and returned to his car. But instead of driving back to the hospital, he drove to the burned ruins of his house. The lot was a blackened scar in the otherwise pristine neighborhood, surrounded by yellow tape and illuminated by a single streetlight. The frame of the house had collapsed into itself, leaving only the foundation and the twisted remains of a life. He parked and walked to the edge of his former property. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, mixed with the chemical stench of fire retardant. In the front yard, where Sarah's garden had once bloomed, there was only ash and scorched earth. Marcus knelt in the dirt and picked up a handful of blackened soil. This was where it had started. This was where Margaret Whitmore had made her stand. And this was where it would end. He stood and walked to the back of the lot, where the woods began. The fire had scorched the first row of trees, but beyond that, the forest remained intact. It was dark and quiet, the kind of place where a person could disappear if they needed to. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found another number from his past. Jake Morrison had been his spotter in Afghanistan. A sniper with the patience of a saint and the morals of a serpent. He'd left the military under circumstances that weren't discussed in polite company, and now he freelanced his services to people who could pay for absolute discretion. Marcus fucking Reed, Jake answered on the first ring. Heard you got married. Domesticated. Soft. My wife was burned alive 3 days ago. My unborn son almost died with her. The line went quiet. When Jake spoke again, his voice had lost its mocking tone. Who do I need to kill? Nobody. Yet. But I need some equipment. And I need it tonight. What kind of equipment? Marcus looked back at the ruins of his house, then at the community center in the distance. The kind that makes a statement. How loud of a statement? Loud enough to be heard from hell. Jake was quiet for a moment. This is about more than justice, isn't it? This is about consequences. Margaret Whitmore has spent her entire life believing that rules don't apply to her. That she see. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem possible. Marcus sat in the hospital cafeteria, watching normal people eat normal breakfasts and discuss normal problems. A mother worried about her daughters. Soccer practice. A businessman complained about his commute. An elderly couple debated whether to visit their grandchildren this weekend. None of them knew that 12 hours from now, their quiet suburban world would be forever changed. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Jake, package delivered. Check the old place. He finished his coffee and walked back to the ICU. Sarah looked exactly the same as she had for the past 4 days, pale, still, connected to machines that breathed for her and monitored every heartbeat. But there was something different in her face, a tension that hadn't been there before. She's been restless, Dr. Martinez explained, checking Sarah's chart. Her brain activity is increasing. That's actually a good sign. It means she's trying to wake up. Marcus took Sarah's hand and felt the familiar warmth of her wedding ring. Can she hear me? It's possible. Many patients report being aware of conversations during their coma. Talk to her. It might help. Marcus waited until the doctor left, then leaned close to Sarah's ear. I know you can hear me, baby. I know you're in there fighting. The doctors say you're getting stronger, and so is our son. He's going to be okay, Sarah. We are all going to be okay. Her fingers twitched slightly in his hand, and Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. I need you to know something, he continued. Margaret Whitmore is going to pay for what she did. Not just with prison time or fines or legal consequences. She's going to pay with everything she has. Tonight, she's holding an emergency HOA meeting. She thinks she's going to use your tragedy to tighten her grip on the neighborhood. But she's wrong. Tonight, her neighbors are going to see who she really is. Sarah's breathing seemed to quicken slightly, as if she was responding to his words. I promise you, when you wake up, Margaret Whitmore will never hurt another family again. The neighborhood will be safe for our son. For all the children who live here. She's had her last victim. Marcus kissed her forehead and left the hospital. He had preparations to make. The drive to his old house took him through the heart of Willowbrook, where the morning routine was in full swing. Children waited for school buses while their parents retrieved newspapers from driveways. Garden sprinklers. Watered lawns with mechanical precision. Everything looked peaceful and normal, but Marcus had learned to see beneath the surface. He noticed Mrs. Patterson quickly gathering her children's toys from the front yard when she saw him drive past. He saw Mr. Chen hurriedly trimming his hedge to exact specifications. He observed the way neighbors avoided eye contact with each other, the subtle fear that permeated their interactions. Margaret Whitmore had created a neighborhood of terrified prisoners, and most of them didn't even realize it. Marcus parked at the ruins of his house and walked to the wooded area behind his property. Hidden beneath a fallen log, exactly where Jake had said it would be, was a waterproof case containing everything he'd requested. Marcus opened it and smiled at the familiar contents: surveillance equipment, communication devices, and something special that would make tonight's meeting unforgettable. He spent the next 2 hours setting up his operation. Wireless cameras went into trees surrounding the community center. Audio equipment was hidden in strategic locations. Most importantly, he installed a small device in the building's electrical system that would give him complete control over the lighting and sound systems. By noon, Marcus had transformed the community center into a theater where Margaret Whitmore would give her final performance. His phone rang as he was testing the equipment. Ray Castellanos. "I've got news," Ray said. Without preamble, Margaret Whitmore's alibi fell apart. One of her book club friends admitted they lied. Says Margaret threatened to have her house condemned if she didn't provide false testimony. "So you're arresting her?" "I'm trying to. But she's lawyered up with some high-powered firm from the city. They are claiming harassment, suggesting that the fire was an accident and we are trying to frame their client because of pressure from you." Marcus felt his jaw clench. "What do you need?" "A smoking gun. Something that directly connects her to the arson. The accelerant evidence is circumstantial. The motive is clear, but motive alone won't convict her. I need her to confess, or I need someone who saw her do it. You'll have what you need by tomorrow morning." "Marcus, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to attend a neighborhood meeting, as is my right as a property owner in Willowbrook Estates. Don't do anything that will compromise the case." "I would never compromise justice, Ray. That's Margaret's specialty." Marcus hung up and returned to the hospital. He found Sarah exactly as he'd left her, but Dr. Martinez was at her bedside with an expression of cautious excitement. "There's been a change," she said. "Her brain activity has increased significantly in the past few hours. Her body is responding to stimuli. I think she's trying to wake up." Marcus felt his heart hammer against his ribs. "When?" "It's hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. But I wanted you to know that the signs are encouraging. Both she and the baby are showing remarkable resilience." After the doctor left, Marcus sat beside Sarah's bed and took her hand. Her skin felt warmer than it had in days, and her breathing seemed more natural. "I can feel you coming back to me," he whispered. "I can feel you fighting. That's my girl. That's the woman I married. You never back down from a fight, do you?" Her eyelids fluttered slightly, and Marcus felt tears on his cheeks. "I need you to stay strong for a few more hours," he continued. "Tonight, I'm going to finish what Margaret started. And when you wake up, she'll never be able to hurt anyone again. I promise you that." As afternoon turned to evening, Marcus made his final preparations. He changed into a dark suit, the same one he'd worn to their wedding, and checked his equipment one last time. Everything was ready. At 6:30 p.m., Marcus positioned himself across the street from the community center. Cars began arriving as neighbors reluctantly made their way to the mandatory meeting. He recognized most of them: the Pattersons, the Chens, the Johnsons who'd fought Margaret and lost. They moved with the resigned shuffle of people attending their own execution. Margaret Whitmore arrived at exactly 6:45 p.m., driving her pristine white Cadillac. She wore a black dress that seemed inappropriately formal for a neighborhood meeting, and she carried a leather briefcase that Marcus knew contained detailed plans for tightening her control over the community. She had no idea that her neighbors were about to see her true face. Marcus activated his surveillance equipment and slipped into the building through a side entrance. The meeting room was arranged exactly as he'd expected, rows of folding chairs facing a podium where Margaret would hold court. About 30 neighbors had gathered, their faces showing various degrees of fear, resentment, and resignation. Margaret took her position at the podium and called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. "As you know, we've recently experienced a tragedy in our community. The fire at the Reed property was a stark reminder of what happens when safety regulations are ignored." Marcus watched from the back of the room, his hand resting on the remote control that would begin the evening's real entertainment. "I've prepared new safety guidelines that will prevent future incidents," Margaret continued. "These regulations will require additional inspections, stricter compliance monitoring, and increased penalties for violations. The cost of these measures will be covered by a special assessment on all homeowners." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. "Margaret, with respect, the Reed fire was arson. It had nothing to do with safety regulations. Margaret's smile was cold as winter. The police investigation is ongoing, Mrs. Patterson. We can't rely on speculation. What we can do is ensure that our community maintains the highest standards of safety and aesthetic appeal. Mr. Chen stood up. You're talking about doubling our HOA fees. Some of us can't afford, then perhaps you should consider whether Willowbrook Estates is the right community for you, Margaret interrupted. We've always maintained high standards here. Those who can't meet them are free to relocate. The room fell silent. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. He pressed the first button on his remote, and the lights dimmed. Margaret looked around in confusion as a large screen descended from the ceiling, a screen that hadn't been there when she'd arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus's voice filled the room through the sound system. I'd like to show you something. The screen flickered to life, showing the recording he'd made the previous night. Margaret's own voice filled the room as she spoke about Sarah's violations and the tragic but inevitable outcome of her non-compliance. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as their HOA president calmly discussed the fire that had nearly killed a pregnant woman and her unborn child. Her clinical detachment, her satisfaction with the solution to the Reed problem, her complete lack of remorse, it was all there in her own words. But Marcus wasn't finished. The screen changed to show documents he'd obtained. The silence that followed Margaret's words was deafening. 30 neighbors sat frozen in their chairs, processing what they'd just heard their HOA president say about a woman fighting for her life in the hospital. Marcus could see the exact moment when the shock transformed into something darker, a collective awakening to the monster they'd allowed to rule their lives. Mrs. Patterson was the first to stand. Margaret, did you just say that Sarah Reed deserved to be burned alive? Margaret's face flushed as she realized her mistake. I didn't mean, what I meant was, you meant exactly what you said, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded men in combat. You meant that my pregnant wife deserved to die because she planted flowers without your permission. Mr. Chen stood up next, his voice shaking with rage. My daughter goes to school with children who live 3 houses down from where that fire happened. You're telling us you think it's acceptable to burn people out of their homes? The fire was an accident, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. The investigation is over, Ray Castellanos announced. From the back of the room. He'd entered so quietly that no one had noticed him until he spoke. Margaret Whitmore, you're under arrest for arson and attempted murder. Margaret's composure finally cracked. This is a setup. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Ray walked down the center aisle, his handcuffs already in his hand. Your book club alibi collapsed this morning. We found accelerant residue in your garage that matches what was used at the Reed house. And now you've just confessed to a room full of witnesses that you believed Sarah Reed deserved what happened to her. As Ray began reading Margaret her rights, the neighbors erupted in angry voices. 8 years of suppressed rage came pouring out as they realized they were finally free to speak their minds. She threatened to have my house condemned because my mailbox was painted the wrong shade of green, Mrs. Patterson shouted. She made my children afraid to play in their own yard. Mr. Chen added. She cost us $20,000 in legal fees fighting her bogus violations, called out Mrs. Johnson, but Marcus wasn't paying attention to the crowd. His focus was entirely on Margaret as Ray cuffed her hands behind her back. She looked smaller now, diminished by the loss of her artificial authority. For the first time in years, she was just another person facing the consequences of her actions. You think this is over? Margaret hissed as Ray led her toward the door. You think you've won? I have connections in this city. I have friends who. Well, your friends abandoned you the moment this became public, Ray said matter-of-factly. The mayor's office called an hour ago. They are launching a full investigation into city planning permits and HOA violations. Turns out a lot of people want to distance themselves from you right now. As Margaret was led away, Marcus felt a strange emptiness where his rage had been. For 4 days, hatred had been his fuel, his reason for getting up in the morning. Now that Margaret was in custody, he wasn't sure what came next. His phone rang. Dr. Martinez. Mr. Reed. You need to get to the hospital immediately. Sarah is waking up. Marcus ran. The drive to Mercy General took 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. Marcus burst through the ICU doors to find Dr. Martinez waiting for him with a smile that lit up her entire face. She's been asking for you, she said. Her speech is still slurred from the intubation, but she's coherent. And Marcus? The baby's vitals are perfect. Sarah's eyes were open when Marcus entered her room. They were the same brilliant green they'd always been, but now they held a depth of pain that hadn't been there before. Still, when she saw him, her face brightened with the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. Hey, soldier, she whispered, her voice hoarse but unmistakably hers. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he took her hand. Hey, beautiful. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. She squeezed his fingers weakly. But I'm alive. We're alive. The baby is fine. Dr. Martinez says has been keeping me strong. Sarah's smile widened. It's a boy, Marcus. We are having a son. Marcus leaned down and kissed her forehead, tasting salt from his own tears. I love you so much. I was so scared I was going to lose you. I heard you, Sarah said. When I was under, I could hear you talking to me. You said you were going to fix everything. I did. Margaret Whitmore was arrested tonight. She's going to prison for what she did to you. Sarah's eyes hardened slightly. Good. What about the neighborhood? Are people safe now? They are free. For the first time in 8 years, they are free to live in their own homes without fear. The HOA is going to be restructured with new leadership. Real leadership. And us? What happens to us now? Marcus looked around the hospital room, then back at his wife's face. We rebuild. We make a new home, a safe home for our son. And we make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Sarah nodded, then winced slightly. I keep thinking about the garden. I know it sounds stupid, but I keep thinking about those flowers I planted. They are gone now, aren't they? The flowers are gone, Marcus admitted. But the garden isn't. We are going to plant a new one. A bigger one. And this time, no one will tell us what we can or can't grow. Over the next few days, as Sarah continued to recover, the full extent of Margaret Whitmore's crimes became clear. The police investigation uncovered years of financial fraud, harassment, and intimidation. More importantly, it revealed the systematic way she'd used the HOA to terrorize families who didn't conform to her vision of suburban perfection. The media picked up the story, and suddenly Willowbrook Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons. HOA president burns down neighbor's house became a national headline, sparking discussions about the abuse of power in residential communities across the country, but Marcus didn't care about the media attention. His focus was entirely on Sarah and their son. Every day, she grew stronger. Every day, the baby's heartbeat grew more steady. Every day, they moved closer to the life they dreamed of building together. 3 weeks after the fire, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. Marcus had rented a furnished apartment across town while they decided what to do about their destroyed home. As they drove through Willowbrook for the first time since the fire, Sarah stared out the window at the neighborhood that had nearly cost her everything. It looks different, she said. Marcus knew what she meant. The neighborhood did look different. Children played in front yards that had been perfectly manicured prisons just weeks before. Halloween decorations appeared on houses without regard for HOA approval. Small acts of rebellion bloomed like flowers after a long winter. The new HOA president is Mrs. Patterson, Marcus said. She's already eliminated half of Margaret's ridiculous rules. People are actually talking to each other again. That's good. Sarah said. But I don't think I can live here anymore. Too many memories. We don't have to. We can go anywhere you want. Sarah was quiet for a moment as they drove past the burned lot where their house had stood. The rubble had been cleared away, leaving only bare earth and the promise of new growth. I want to stay, she said finally. I want to rebuild our house. Right here on this lot. I want to plant the most beautiful garden this neighborhood has ever seen. And I want to raise our son in a place where he'll never be afraid to be himself. Marcus pulled over and looked at his wife. Are you sure? After everything that happened. Sarah's hand moved to a still flat stomach, where their son was growing strong and healthy. Margaret Whitmore tried to burn us out because she was afraid of what we represented. We were young, diverse, unafraid to challenge her authority. She saw us as a threat to her perfect world. And now? Now her perfect world is gone, and we are still here. We survived, Marcus. We won. This is our neighborhood now, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let her ghost chase us away from our home. That evening, Marcus and Sarah sat on the couch in their temporary apartment, looking through architectural plans for their new house. It would be bigger than the old one, with large windows and an open floor plan that would fill every room with light. But most importantly, it would have a garden. I want roses by the mailbox, Sarah said, pointing to the landscaping diagram. And herbs by the kitchen window. And maybe a vegetable garden in the back where our son can learn to grow his own food. What about HOA approval? Marcus asked with a grin. The new HOA rules are simple, Sarah replied. Keep your property clean, don't disturb your neighbors. And plant whatever makes you happy. Mrs. Patterson says she's going to encourage people to express themselves through their gardens. Marcus laughed. Margaret would have a heart attack if she could see what the neighborhood is becoming. Good thing she's going to be in prison for the next 20 years. As they planned their new life, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. The rage that had sustained him through Sarah's recovery was gone, replaced by something much more powerful. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the front yard of their new house, watching Sarah plant roses in the exact spot where Margaret Whitmore had tried to destroy their dreams. Their son kicked actively in Sarah's belly, as if he approved of his mother's gardening choices. What do you think? Sarah asked, standing back to admire her work. Too rebellious for the neighborhood. Marcus looked at the riot of colors blooming in there,